For 35 years I was the odd one out, the daughter who never quite fit the Wilson family picture. At my father's $60,000 birthday party, he said it out loud, "I'm proud of all my children, except her." What he didn't know was that I had a DNA test in my purse, proof he was never my real father. In front of 350 guests I exposed the secret they spent decades hiding. You'll want to see how this ends. I'm 34-year-old Claire Wilson, and I'm at my father Charles's extravagant $65,000 birthday party wearing a couture dress. I've been the odd one out in my ideal family photo for years. My dad publicly humiliated me tonight with comments that finally validated what I'd always felt, while champagne flowed and Chicago's elite mixed. He had no idea how drastically things would alter as a result of the DNA test results in my purse. Family secrets can sometimes remain hidden until someone makes the decision to uncover them. Tell me where you're seeing from in the comments if you're watching this. To learn how I reclaimed not just the $230,000 Maybach but also my entire identity, hit the like button and subscribe. I could always see the differences when I looked at my childhood pictures. Charles's brilliant blonde hair and vivid blue eyes were a blessing to my three siblings, Ethan, Lily, and Jake. Then there was me, the odd one out, with my hazel eyes and auburn hair. My mother Margot used to reply, "You take after your grandmother," whenever I asked about our differences. Despite the fact that neither grandma had my coloring, I agreed with this reasoning. The physical distinctions were only the first step. Chicago real estate tycoon Charles Wilson, who has projects all across the Midwest, never gave me the same look he gave my siblings. Charles would hoist Ethan onto his shoulders after he hit a home run in Little League. He would spin Lily around and bring her roses after she won dance competitions. There were lavish celebration feasts for Jake's successes in the science fair. I still recall winning the regional spelling bee in 4th grade, and my academic accomplishments, which were consistently better than those of my siblings, were recognized with generic, "good jobs," and distracted nods. My mother sat by herself in the audience as other parents recorded their kids. That evening, Charles had a crucial meeting. Nevertheless, he found a way to attend Ethan's baseball game during the regular season. My mother's eyes would never quite contact mine as she explained, "Your father's just busy with work, honey." She made care to honor my achievements with special mother-daughter outings, overcompensating with her own affection. I now realized that she was attempting to fill a gap that she was aware of. The Wilson family had a spacious estate with 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, indoor and outdoor pools, and a 3-car garage that housed Charles's collection of high-end cars in Lake Forest, one of the most affluent suburbs of Chicago. We appeared to be the quintessential American family, a prosperous businessman for a father, a refined stay-at-home mom, and 4 intelligent, pretty kids. The neighborhood was envious of our Christmas cards. Reality was different within those immaculate walls. When I was 8 years old, 2 hours after dismissal, no one had come to get me, so the school called my parents. When a business opportunity presented itself, Charles seemingly forgot that he was due to pick me up that day. At Jake's doctor's appointment, my mother was present. I will never forget the pathetic glance I received from the school secretary. With mounds of gifts beneath a beautifully decked 12-foot tree, Christmas mornings in the Wilson home were lavish celebrations. I saw a trend every year. My siblings would open the newest gaming consoles, high-end clothing, or pricey gadgets. My gifts were usually notably less expensive and less considerate, even though they were nice enough to avoid blatant complaints. All 3 of my siblings got brand new laptops one year when I was 12. I received a gift card. Nevertheless, I made a valiant effort to gain Charles's acceptance. I worked hard in school and received excellent grades when I graduated from elementary school. I participated in every club and activity I could throughout middle school in the hopes that he would attend at least one. The program for my solo in the 7th grade choir concert is still with me. Throughout my performance, I kept scanning the audience, searching for his face. Later, my mother informed me that Dad had to attend an urgent client dinner. Does my father love me? When I was 13, I at last asked my mother directly. We were sitting away from Charles's demanding presence in her garden, which served as her haven. The roses she was caring for froze in her hands. "He certainly does, Claire. He simply finds it hard to be affectionate." My first real doubt was sparked by the faint tremble in her voice. I came up with the hypothesis that I was adopted by the age of 14. The emotional distance, the bodily differences would be explained. While my parents were at one of Charles's charity galas, I looked through our home office for adoption documents. Rather, I discovered that Charles Wilson was listed as my father on my birth certificate. It was still a mystery. Charles's real estate company flourished during this time. Wilson Properties built commercial malls, office towers, and opulent residences throughout Chicago and the surrounding states. Business journals frequently published pieces about his accomplishment, frequently accompanied by pictures of his family and work-life balance. Even as a teenager, I recognized the irony. During interviews, he would put his arm around my mother and highlight my brothers, saying, "Family is everything." I was always a little distance away, like the photographer could detect the imaginary wall. My mother made an effort to make up for Charles's coldness by being warm herself. She made ornate scrapbooks of my accomplishments, attended every function, and preserved every honor and certificate. She would occasionally gaze at me with an odd expression of pride and grief that I was unable to interpret, until today. Our family kept up appearances long after the emotional neglect ended. Every year, family photographs were updated, Sunday dinners were required, and summer trips to Martha's Vineyard were meticulously shared on social media. Charles would put his hand on Ethan's shoulder and his other arm around Lily in every picture. Beside them, Jake would stand with pride. I was always placed a little bit aside, generally next to my mom. I came to terms with it. To take the mild rejections as commonplace. Maybe Charles was tougher on me because he saw greater potential, I told myself. Perhaps he respected my freedom by keeping a distance. Youngsters are exceptionally adept at making up stories to shield them from unpleasant realities. I had mastered the knack of looking for approval from other sources by the time I started high school. Teachers took on the role of my surrogate parents, and their admiration helped to fill the void created by Charles's lack of interest. Nothing, however, was able to fully soothe the pain of witnessing my father proudly glare at my brothers while hardly mentioning me. Although high school was supposed to represent a new beginning, the habits formed during childhood just got worse. My siblings continued to get good B averages, which pleased Charles, while I poured myself into my studies with enthusiasm and graduated as valedictorian of my class. He was hardly aware of my flawless 4.0 GPA and 99th percentile SAT results. At a meal where my report card was briefly discussed, before swiftly shifting to Ethan's football scholarship prospects, he said, "Not everyone needs to be an academic overachiever, Claire." It hurt more to have my accomplishments disregarded than it would have to be directly criticized. One particularly terrible milestone was turning 16. The Wilsons celebrated their 16th birthday with great fanfare. They gave Ethan a brand new BMW. The cost of Lily's Sweet 16 celebration was close to $20,000. An identical vehicle and a weekend getaway to New York would eventually be given to Jake. My mother organized a simple meal at a fancy restaurant in downtown Chicago for my 16th birthday. Charles was 45 minutes late, kept checking his watch during the meal, and left before dessert was served, claiming he had an urgent business matter to attend to. As she watched him go, my mother whispered, "I'm sorry, sweetie," with sad eyes. You are aware of the significance of his work. However, I heard my parents fighting in their bedroom later that evening. "Charles, she's your daughter too," normally so composed. My mother's voice faltered with rage. "I did turn up, did I not?" he answered icily. "For a total of 20 minutes. Not even cake could keep you there. What message does that convey, do you know? Margot, what do you want from me?" I could still hear him through the door, but his voice became softer. "I've given her everything she might require. The best vacations, schools, and clothing. What else am I meant to do? Become a father," my mother said plainly. "Love her just as much as you love everyone else." The ensuing hush was deafening. Before I could hear his answer, I crept back to my room. However, his delayed denial supported my long-held suspicion that there was more at play than just personality differences preventing Charles and I from connecting. There could not have been a more striking difference between my celebration and my brother Ethan's 16th birthday party 2 years prior. In addition to inviting half of Chicago's corporate elite and renting out the entire top floor of the Willis Tower, Charles gave a heartfelt speech expressing his pride in his firstborn son, who embodies everything a Wilson should be. I concentrated on elite universities as college application season drew near in the hopes that Charles would finally respect me for my top-tier academic performance. My mother planned a little celebration supper after receiving acceptance letters from Stanford, Yale, and Harvard. When I told Charles that I had been accepted to Harvard, he said, "Northwestern is a better business school anyway. It's also local." Remaining in Chicago was the right decision for Ethan. He didn't seem to care that I was interested in marketing and literature, not business. I heard another exchange later that week that would follow me for years. In Charles's home office, My mother informed him that Harvard was requesting $30,000 after scholarships. That's absurd, he answered. Northwestern gave Ethan a full scholarship to play sports. Jake will probably receive the same treatment. Although Claire received academic scholarships, they are not comprehensive. Charles, Harvard is still Harvard. Why should I pay for her to study English literature, which is pointless 3,000 miles away? With an unusually strong tone, my mother answered, You understand why you must do this. We've already talked about this. When they saw me in the corridor, the topic of conversation changed. But I kept thinking about those words. You know why you have to do this. To what duty was my mother alluding? What was the unwritten contract between my parents about me? Charles was reluctant, but I went to Harvard and majored in English with a marketing minor. Being away from Chicago was a pleasant diversion from the continual reminder that I was an outsider in the family. I only went home for significant holidays throughout those 4 years, and that's when the patterns persisted. My sophomore year's Thanksgiving is very memorable. The entire dinner talk focused on Charles's success and my brother's sports accomplishments, as he had recently closed a significant development project. Charles interrupted me when I brought up my offer of an internship from a prominent publishing business. Claire, the publishing sector is fading. You ought to concentrate on something useful. After graduating, Ethan has already received an offer to work at Wilson Properties. I surprised myself by being direct in my response, saying, I wasn't planning to join the family business. Charles's face became stern. Obviously not. That is for Wilson family members who value tradition and loyalty. There was silence at the table. My siblings appeared uneasy about the overt exclusion as well. Although my mother swiftly shifted the topic, the harm had already been done. In essence, Charles had said that even though I had his name, I wasn't truly related to the family in the sense that he cared about. My sister Lily knocked on my bedroom door that evening. She sat on the edge of my bed and said, Dad was acting like a jerk at dinner. You know how he gets under pressure at work. Steph, it's not just stress, I answered. He has always treated me in this manner. She seems truly perplexed. What are you saying? Dad treats us all harshly. Not like me. Did you not notice? Lily's uneasy look suggested that she might have observed but decided not to admit it. Weakly, she said, He just communicates differently with different people. I learned something significant from the chat. Even my siblings were unable to completely acknowledge the toxic nature of the family dynamic I was a part of since it had become so commonplace. They saw Charles as a loving and strict father who encouraged his kids to succeed. The icy coldness that underlies his sporadic acknowledgments was only felt by me. I had already made the decision to go it alone by the time I received my Harvard summa cum laude degree. Charles mostly used his phone to check his emails during the wedding, which he attended with my mother. I secretly vowed to create a life so prosperous that I would never again require Charles Wilson's approval, as graduates toss their caps into the air. I joined the workforce amid a difficult economic time, armed with my Harvard degree, and a resolve to achieve success on my own terms. I applied under my mother's maiden name instead of using the Wilson name, which would have given me access to Chicago's corporate community. What are you doing? When my mother saw my modified resume, she inquired. You might benefit from your father's connections. I informed her. I need to know I can make it on my own. I didn't mention that I would much prefer suffer on my own than be successful due to a man who couldn't bring himself to love me. I started off at a medium-sized Boston marketing company. My small apartment and student loan payments were barely covered by the initial income, but it gave me invaluable experience in a field I liked, unrelated to Charles's influence. I volunteered for every difficult assignment, put in 80-hour work weeks, and spent my little free time researching market trends. I was promoted to account manager in less than 2 years. I was leading my own team by the 3rd year. Before I was 30, I was promoted to vice president, which came with a salary that at last enabled me to live comfortably and begin making my own investments. My interactions with the Wilson family during those early years of my job boiled down to required Christmas phone calls and sporadic visits when I was traveling close to Chicago for work. My siblings all occupied their designated positions inside Charles's growing real estate company. As executive vice president, Ethan assumed the role of heir apparent. Jake oversaw their technology integration business, while Lily led their interior design division. The only stable link I had to the family was my mother. We talked once a week, and she came to see me twice a year in Boston, but never with Charles. Away from the meticulously preserved exterior of Wilson family perfection, she appeared more at ease and genuine in some way during these encounters. During one such visit she said, "Your father asks about you," but the information she provided regarding these alleged questions was consistently ambiguous and unpersuasive. "He's got my number," I said plainly. "He never gives a call." I left my job at age 31 to start my own company, Horizon Marketing Partners, which specializes in digital strategy for premium businesses. I was pleasantly surprised by the return on my gamble. With offices in Boston and New York, we grew from 3 personnel to 23 in just 18 months. Even Charles's social circle was impressed by the names on my client list, but I never used those relationships to get family favor. Freedom came from financial success. I bought a high-end condo with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the harbor in downtown Boston. I saw steady growth in my investing portfolio. For the first time, I knew what it was like to be appreciated for my contributions, rather than being judged by unrealistic expectations from my family. I first got to know James at this time of professional success. This connection felt different from the beginning, unlike other relationships that had failed in part because of my guarded character and in part because of my workaholic tendencies. My carefully cultivated independence was exposed to the unhealed wounds underneath by James, a business lawyer with a degree in psychology. He proposed treatment in a gentle manner after we had been dating for 3 months and he had heard stories about my family. "By traditional measures, you've accomplished extraordinary success," he said. "However, I can see how you alter when your family, especially your father, is brought up. Have you thought about discussing it with someone?" I was reluctant at first, but I gave in. I was able to identify patterns that I had normalized throughout my life, such as hyperachievement, difficulty accepting praise, and fear of vulnerability, thanks to Dr. Landon, a family therapist who specializes in adult children of emotionally absent parents. These patterns were all linked to the core question that I had never been able to answer. Why was my father unable to love me? During one session, Dr. Landon clarified that there isn't always a logical explanation for a parent's inability to connect with a child. But occasionally there are specific causes that are unrelated to the child's deservingness of love. Like what? I inquired. Secrets from the family. Birth circumstances. Projections of their own shortcomings. She paused in contemplation. Have you ever thought about the notion that your father's remoteness could have a cause other than personality conflicts? There was a lingering question. Months before, James had raised a similar question. Charles might not be my biological father. Then I had brushed it off. However, the concept has now reappeared with new meaning in the context of therapy. I said, "He is listed as my father on my birth certificate." Dr. Landon gently retorted, "Birth certificates record legal parentage. Biological reality isn't always true." They sowed the seed. The question persisted despite my initial resistance to its consequences. If the man who had rejected me throughout my life turned out not to be my father, what would that mean? Would that explain why he was so frigid, or would it only make the already unpleasant family dynamic worse? James was there for me during those challenging treatment sessions. Never pressuring, always providing insight when requested. He appeared to realize that my accomplishments and my defenses were 2 sides of the same coin, unlike other partners who were either scared by my success or turned off by my emotional guardedness. One evening, while we were watching the sunset from my apartment, he said to me, "You don't have to figure out the mystery of your family to be worthy of love. But I'm with you every step of the way if knowing would bring you peace." I thought about it for months without doing anything about it. For years I had opposed the commercial choice to move my company to Chicago in order to stay out of Charles's sphere of influence. I kept my primary house in Boston, but I visited my hometown more often because of the new office. Some of these trips to Chicago included visits to see my siblings. Through Christmas cards, birthday texts, and infrequent dinners when schedules permitted, our connections had developed into a friendly distance. They appeared sincere in their pride in my accomplishments, albeit a little perplexed by my total disengagement from the family business. During one of these dinners, Ethan informed me, "Dad mentions your company sometimes. He saw your Forbes feature." "Did he?" I answered, detesting the fact that, after everything, I was still impacted by his possible approval. "The next time you're in town, you should stop by the house," he recommended. Changes occur. Individuals evolve. I didn't think Charles was any different. However, I started to question whether I had changed enough to be able to compete with him on an equal basis. In terms of yearly revenue, my business now competed with some of Wilson Properties' divisions. Without his name or connections, I had established my success. Perhaps it was time to put the past behind us and move on. But life had other ideas. My mother called with news that would completely alter my life before I could make up my mind about getting back in touch with Charles. Despite the weight of the words, she spoke steadily as she said, "It's cancer. Breast cancer in stage 3. Although the treatment will be aggressive, the physicians remain hopeful." That same day, I took a plane to Chicago. The Wilsons came together around my mother's diagnosis despite our differences. Charles made arrangements with the top oncologists. Ethan took care of the paperwork and insurance. Lily set up a timetable for care. Clinical trials were studied by Jake. In order to remain in Chicago throughout her initial treatment, I took a leave of absence from my employer. It was startling to see Charles again after years of little communication. He was older, with deep creases around his eyes and gray now predominating in his once blonde hair. He nodded at me when I got to the hospital, but he kept his distance and gave my mother's care his whole attention. An incident that would eventually break decades of concealment happened on the 3rd day of her hospital stay. A nurse arrived to take a blood sample for further analysis. She looked at my mom's chart and bracelet. She said, "We'll have to type her blood again. The records appear to be inconsistent." Without thinking, I responded, "She's O negative." I spoke without thinking, recalling this knowledge from childhood conversations about the blood types of our family. My mother and I shared the uncommon O negative type, while Charles and my brothers were all A positive. I said, "She's O negative," without thinking. Startled, the nurse looked up. "Are you related? You have the same blood type." My response was, "I'm her daughter." "Oh." The nurse was truly perplexed. "I assumed you were a friend." The patient's husband mentioned that all their children have his blood type. I sat with this knowledge after she departed, the parts fitting together. I knew enough about basic biology to understand that if Charles were A positive and my mother O negative, then their offspring might be either O negative or positive. While it wasn't impossible, the fact that I was O negative and all 3 of my siblings were A positive added another piece to the jigsaw. I bought an ancestral DNA test during the weeks of my mother's first treatment. It was only curiosity, I told myself, a diversion from long waits in medical rooms. Actually, I had to know. I needed the answer, whatever it was. 6 weeks later, I opened the results by myself in my hotel room. The ethnic breakdown revealed a preponderance of Western European heritage, which was consistent with what I understood about my mother's and Wilson's families. However, the DNA matching section had the most shocking facts. My mother and all 3 of my siblings were there, prominently displayed, with the typical proportions for a mother and half-siblings. Notably missing was Charles Wilson. For days I sat with this knowledge, not knowing what to do. Following her 2nd round of chemotherapy, my mother's condition had stabilized. She was still physically fragile, but her prognosis was becoming better. Was now the appropriate moment to face decades of dishonesty? In the end, I picked a calm afternoon when we were by ourselves in her hospital room and she was feeling rather well. "Mom," I said cautiously, "I need the truth and I have a big question for you." Maybe she had been anticipating this conversation for years, or maybe she saw something in my face. But before I even presented her the findings of the DNA test, comprehension appeared in her eyes. "Is my biological father Charles?" I asked straight. Her eyes welled with tears. She muttered, "Oh, Claire," and reached for my hand. I always knew this day might come. The tale came slowly and cruelly to light. My mother had reconciled with her former boyfriend, Daniel Calloway, just prior to her engagement to Charles. An unintended pregnancy resulted from a night of champagne and melancholy. She and Charles had already declared their engagement by the time she found out she was pregnant. She added, "Charles agreed to raise you as his own," as tears ran down her cheeks. "But he made me promise never to tell anyone, including you." He was establishing his company, constructing a picture. It was troublesome enough that the fiancée was pregnant, let alone when infidelity was involved. Even though I already knew the answer, I nevertheless inquired, "Did he ever plan to tell me?" Her words were feeble. "He thought it was kinder not to," she murmured. "He tried, Claire. In the beginning, he really tried to love you the same way. But he couldn't. Or wouldn't. After decades of emotional neglect, the difference barely made a difference." I inquired, "Who is Daniel Calloway? Is he still alive? Does he know about me?" My mom gave a headshake. "He moved to California before you were born." I never told him. Charles insisted we make a clean break. She paused. I looked him up online a few years ago. He passed away in 2015. Heart attack. I was shocked to learn that my biological father had passed away without ever being aware of my existence. Before I could even recognize it, a connection I never knew I had was cut off forever. Please, my mother said, shakily holding my hand. Don't tell anyone yet. Not while I'm fighting this. I couldn't bear the family falling apart right now. I was furious about decades of dishonesty, but I was powerless to refuse her request. To deal with cancer, she needed her family to be united. The reality was 34 years old. A couple more months could pass. I kept up the front while she was being treated. Charles still treated me with courteous disinterest when I went to family dinners. Without disclosing what I now knew, that they were only my half-siblings genetically, I worked with my siblings to arrange for her care. Knowing that Charles had kept a lie all of his life that had hurt me beyond measure, I watched him play the loyal husband. My mother's condition went into remission 6 months later. The family dined at her favorite restaurant to celebrate. Charles revealed his plans for a lavish 65th birthday celebration as champagne flowed and she was toasted to her recovery. Now that Margot is better, it's time to celebrate life properly, he said. I'm renting the grand ballroom at the Peninsula. Everyone who's anyone in Chicago will be there. During one of our quiet moments, my mother called me aside while preparations for the grand event were being made. She whispered, I'm going to tell him that you know. Now that I'm better, it's time for honesty. I acknowledged her purpose and nodded, but I didn't think it would fundamentally alter our relationship. A mere recognition of biological reality was insufficient to remove 30 years of emotional remoteness. My mother contacted 2 weeks prior to Charles's extravagant birthday celebration. I told him, was all she said. He knows that you know. I inquired, what did he say? A pause occurred. He said it doesn't change anything. That legally you're still a Wilson. Another moment of silence. He asked that you not mention it at his birthday celebration for the family's sake, of course. Even today, outward appearance was more important than reality. The family image and Charles's reputation are still crucial. With hesitation, my mother inquired, will you come to the party? It would mean a lot to me. I was unable to turn down her request in spite of everything. I realized the value of being present, especially in trying situations, and the frailty of time after witnessing her struggle for her life. I said I'll be there, but I had a strategy in place beforehand. Did Charles wish to keep up appearances? All right. However, I would never again engage in the family charade. Charles Wilson's 65th birthday was being celebrated in the Peninsula Chicago's Grand Ballroom, and the invitation, which was made of rich cream cardstock and came in an embossed envelope, arrived by courier. You must wear a black tie. RSVP is required. No presents are required. I laughed bitterly at the last line. Charles Wilson, who is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, suggests that no presents should be given, yet he also expects lavish demonstrations of gratitude from everyone around him. Over dinner in my Boston apartment, James remarked, are you sure you want to go? As we talked about the event that was coming up. During my mother's illness and the subsequent DNA reveal, he had been my pillar of support. It was I need closure, I said. 34 years of feeling like an outsider, wondering what was wrong with me. Now I know it wasn't me at all. It was him. His choice. His lie. His inability to love a child who wasn't biologically his. James gave a contemplative nod. What exactly are you planning? I paused. Ever since I had spoken to my mother, the notion had been developing. I'm going to acknowledge the truth. Publicly. Not dramatically, not vindicatively. But honestly. No more secrets. No more pretending. He will be enraged, James cautioned. I'm counting on it, I said. But what can he do? Disown me? I've never been a true daughter to him anyway. James grabbed my hand from across the table. I'll be right beside you. Whatever you decide. It was all the difference to have him on my side. We worked together to plan how I would approach the celebration. In the very social circle Charles had been using his lies to shield, the truth would be shouted out loud in a respectful but unambiguous manner. I put myself into the preparations with just 2 weeks to go before the event. The attire was important. I wanted to appear accomplished, self-assured, and totally independent. I chose a stunning emerald green evening gown from a designer whose marketing my company had recently developed after perusing a number of upscale boutiques. My auburn hair, which had always distinguished me from the blonde Wilson line, was accentuated by the color. The issue of a present followed. It was not an option to arrive without anything, even though the invitation implied otherwise. However, how do you respond to a man who has everything but hasn't given you anything that really matters? Ethan, who contacted to arrange the party's travel arrangements, provided the response. He remarked nonchalantly, "Dad has been eyeing the new Maybach. Last week, test drove one. Most likely waiting for one of us to pick up on his clues." Mercedes Maybach S-Class, the latest model. A car worth $230,000. It was just the sort of status symbol Charles would value. Even though it would be a substantial expense, I could afford it given the success of my business. "Perhaps we ought to collaborate on it," Ethan proposed. "Divide it 4 ways among the children." In a single second, I decided to respond, "Actually, I think I'll handle this one myself." Ethan's voice was startled. "The entire thing?" He didn't finish the notion, but I understood what he meant, so that's a good gesture. With my tense relationship with Charles in mind, considering I had nothing to repay Charles, big gestures are in order, I remarked vaguely. When I went to the Mercedes dealership in Boston the next day, I ordered the exact model Charles had test-driven in Chicago, obsidian black, with an interior of porcelain/black Napa leather and all the luxury packages offered. The day before the celebration, I made arrangements for delivery to my hotel in Chicago. "Are you interested in a conventional key presentation box?" the manager of sales inquired. "Yes," I said. "And to accompany it, I'll need a special card." I wrote the card's message several times that night before deciding on something straightforward yet clear. "From the daughter you decided not to love to Charles." "I'm going to do it now." I made an appointment with Dr. Landon the week prior to the celebration to go over my arrangements. "Are you looking for closure or retribution?" She posed the question bluntly. "Is there a distinction?" I retorted. "Very large," she remarked. "Seeking revenge traps you in a vicious cycle of suffering. You can move on to something greater when you have closure." Her remark struck a chord. I explained this isn't about hurting him the way he hurt me. The truth, which everyone has danced around my entire life, must be acknowledged. After that, I can at last proceed. Dr. Landon gave a nod. "Just be ready for the chance that Charles won't ever own his part in your suffering. Some folks just can't accept their own shortcomings." James and I sat on my balcony the night before our flight to Chicago, watching the Boston cityscape sparkle against the night sky. "Are you anxious?" With his arm across my shoulders, he inquired. "Amazingly, no," I answered. "I feel at ease. It's as like I'm finally taking charge of a story that has been created for me my entire life." "Remember that your value isn't based on Charles Wilson's ability to love," James added, turning to me, "no matter what happens tomorrow. You have created a remarkable life for yourself." Chicago's fall weather was ideal on the morning of the celebration. When James and I arrived at the Peninsula Hotel, the delivered Maybach key was waiting for us in a gorgeously wrapped box. The dealership was holding the automobile until after the party, when I would make the final ownership decision. I saw my image in the mirror as I got ready for the evening, putting on lipstick and doing my hair. Although she didn't have Charles's DNA, the woman who was staring back had his last name. She lacked his harshness but had his financial sense. I had spent 34 years trying to win the affection of a man who couldn't give it to me. I would finally give up tonight. To celebrate Charles Wilson's 65th birthday, the grand ballroom at the Peninsula Chicago was turned into a display of wealth and power. Tables with white rose and hydrangea arrangements were illuminated by crystal chandeliers. As white glove servers passed around champagne and hors d'oeuvres, a string quartet played softly in one corner. A who's who of Midwest power brokers, the guest list comprised at least 300 members of Chicago's commercial, governmental, and social elites. As we walked in, James gave a little whistle. "Very impressive production," he muttered. "It must have been very expensive." I answered, $65,000. $1,000 for every year of his valuable life. We moved through the crowd, pausing now and then to say hello to people we knew. Charles's group and my own network of contacts intersected because of my marketing success. I sensed that someone was following us. The prodigal daughter had come back. The prosperous businesswoman who had earned her wealth outside of the Wilson empire. Greeting guests, Charles and my mother stood close to the middle of the room. When she first saw me, my mother's face lit up. She looked stunning, almost fully recovered. Her blonde hair was groomed neatly, and she wore a modest blue gown that accentuated her still slim figure. She screamed out, "Claire," and held out her arms. "You look amazing." I gave her a firm embrace before turning to Charles. Despite his evident efforts to keep up his appearance, he looked every inch of his 65 years up close. He shook hands firmly but quickly. His eyes did not meet his smile. You succeeded, he stated bluntly. With equal coldness I answered. I wouldn't miss it. My mother abruptly interrupted, obviously attempting to defuse the situation, saying, This must be James. So much has been said about you. Charles leaned a little toward me while James spoke to her. Your mother claims that you've had a lot of success in Boston. With a tinge of pride in my voice, I responded, Horizon Marketing generated $50 million in revenue last year. With a small nod, he admitted, impressive, but he swiftly added, compared to marketing services, real estate offers more stable long-term growth. He was still unable to provide a straightforward compliment without undermining it. A few things remained constant. I didn't want to drag out this particular discussion, so I said, We should catch up with Ethan and the others. Charles, have fun at your party. It was already a few drinks into the evening when my siblings gathered around the bar. Though a little taciturn, their greetings were friendlier than Charles's. A divide that transcended geography had been established by years of living apart. With a faux toast, Ethan raised his glass and declared, The prodigy returns. He was now 37 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded the same self-assured demeanor as Charles. How is Boston treating you? I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and said, Can't complain. As the heir apparent, how is life going? Ethan smiled. I'm learning the ropes, but Dad isn't even close to being ready to step down. Next month, we will begin construction on the Riverside development, which you should see. We've all seen the features about Horizon Marketing, Lily interrupted. It was an amazing Lux Brands campaign. I sincerely appreciated her recognition and answered, Thanks. People have been taking notice of your interior design work for Wilson Properties as well. I saw the article in Architectural Digest. At 30, Jake was the youngest and appeared to be the most sincere in his greeting. We ought to work together sometime, he proposed. Wilson Properties' tech-integrated buildings could benefit from creative marketing strategies. For a little while, we were able to bridge the divide caused by years and circumstances by engaging in shop chat. For accomplished experts, talking about company strategy seemed almost regular for a while. We temporarily put aside our complex family dynamic. The announcement of dinner broke the illusion. I was seated at the family table, but I was the one farthest away from Charles. An outward sign of my peripheral position, James silently reminded me of his support by squeezing my hand beneath the table. Each course of the meal was increasingly complex as it went along. High-end wines were freely available as the room was alive with chatter. I could see Charles holding court from where I was, completely comfortable being the focus of attention. His element was surrounded by admirers, showcasing his meticulously created persona as a prosperous businessman and family patriarch. The moment I had both feared and looked forward to came after the dessert dish. Charles got up and tapped his crystal glass softly to get attention. As everyone's gaze shifted to him, the room gradually became quiet. With a firm and assured voice, he opened, Thank you all for coming tonight. Being 65 years old is a significant milestone that encourages introspection. I've been really lucky in both my family and business lives. He went on to discuss the high points of his career, including the establishment of Wilson Properties, significant advancements that changed the skyline of Chicago, and accolades and distinctions earned over his 40 years in the real estate industry. The audience paid close attention and occasionally cheered his accomplishments. After that, he switched to family. But the happiness of family outweighs any business accomplishment. Margot, my wife, he said, pointing to my mother, who obediently grinned, has been my partner in everything for 38 lovely years. Her recent health issues served as a reminder to all of us of the value of spending time together. The room echoed with a sympathetic murmur as everyone nodded. Charles went on, looking at my siblings, and my children have been my greatest legacy. Ethan, who has demonstrated great potential in carrying on the Wilson Properties legacy. Lily, whose creative vision has turned our advancements into works of art. Jake, whose technological advancements are setting up our business for success in the future. Then he turned to face me, and I could feel the room's warmth drop a few degrees. A short pregnant pause ensued. And Claire, who decided to follow her own path, away from the family business. He remarked in a tone that was notably cooler. One more pause. Then came the words that would make all the difference. With the exception of her, I'm proud of all of my kids. Claire, you never quite fit in, did you? There was utter silence in the room. The guests looked at each other uncomfortably. The color faded from my mother's face. My siblings appeared surprised, obviously unprepared for such a public rejection. Something solidified within of me at that very instant. 34 years of trying to get approval, of pondering my own condition, of attempting to win affection that ought to have come naturally. It was all compressed into crystal clearness. This man had just released me from any last duty to act like he was my father, even if he had never been in any meaningful sense. I gently got up from my chair and stood up straight. As I moved, the emerald dress caught the light, attracting everyone's attention. James began to stand beside me, but I signaled that I needed to do this alone by lightly touching his shoulder. In the quiet chamber I answered, "You're right, Charles," in a calm, clear voice. I didn't fit in. I glanced around the room, looking into the eyes of people I had known since I was a youngster, including mentors, rivals, family friends, and business acquaintances. I believed that to be my failure for years, some basic defect that rendered me unworthy of your affection. I took the results of the DNA test I had brought for this very moment out of my evening bag. I unfurled the papers, and they produced a gentle sound. However, I now realized that it wasn't my fault at all. You owned it. I moved gently around the table and went straight up to Charles. With every stride I took, my heels made a sharp, purposeful click against the marble floor. Intentional. Measured. You couldn't love me, I replied. Because every time you looked at me, I reminded you of a truth you couldn't face. I put the DNA findings in front of him on the table. I wasn't your biological daughter, but I was still a child who deserved love. Not 3 decades of calculated indifference. Whispers and gasps filled the room. Charles's knuckles turned white around his champagne glass while his cheeks turned a deep scarlet. "This is hardly the time or place," he said in a menacingly low voice. "You chose the time and place," I replied, "when you publicly humiliated me in front of 300 guests. For 34 years I've lived with your rejection. I've achieved success you never acknowledged, built a life you never valued, and finally discovered a truth you never had the courage to tell me." I turned to face the astonished audience, many of whom were now observing with unabashed interest. The perfect Wilson family image has always been just that, an image. A carefully constructed facade hiding the reality that Charles Wilson could not love a child who didn't share his DNA, despite raising her as his own. I turned back to Charles and grabbed the gift box with the Maybach key inside. "I brought you a gift. A new Mercedes Maybach S-Class. Exactly the model you test drove last week." I took the card and the key out of the box. But gifts, like parenthood, can be reconsidered. I took it up again after closing the package. "This key, like your love, will remain out of reach. Some things, once revealed, can't be wrapped up again in pretty packages." With a loud scrape of his chair against the floor, Charles jerked to his feet. "Enough," he growled back. "You've made your point." "Actually," I replied, rising even higher, "I've only just started finding my voice. But you're right about one thing, I don't belong here. I never did. Not because of my DNA, but because I refused to accept conditional love as good enough." I looked at my mom, who had tears in her eyes. "Mom, I love you. This isn't about you. Take care of yourself." To my siblings I said, "Blood makes us related. DNA doesn't change that. We grew up together. When you're ready to have a relationship that isn't defined by Charles's terms, you know how to reach me." I turned to face James at last, and he watched me with pride in his eyes. He got up and walked over to me, holding my hand. Speaking to the group one last time, I remarked, "Thank you all for the clarity this evening has provided. The truth truly does set you free." With the Maybach key still in my fingers, I turned and headed for the exit with James at my side. Chaos broke out behind us, with guests muttering in horrified astonishment, Charles trying to restore control of the room, and my mother sobbing. I didn't even aware I was carrying a weight until we pushed past the ballroom doors and into the hotel foyer. I wasn't looking for Charles Wilson's praise or lamenting its absence for the first time in my life. I was Claire, defined by my own actions, decisions, and ability to love. Not from a man who had never been my real dad. Charles's birthday party's aftermath developed as quickly and violently as a thunderstorm in Chicago. My phone was already flooded with notifications by the time James and I arrived at our hotel room. These included messages from guests expressing shock, pity, or morbid interest, as well as texts from siblings and heartfelt voicemails from my mother. As I stared at the gadget that was vibrating nonstop in my hand, I asked James, should I turn it off? That's entirely up to you, he said. This is your story now. You get to decide how and when to engage. I turned the phone off, but I didn't turn it off entirely. In spite of everything, I was unable to completely cut off my ties to my family. Especially not to my mother, who I knew was in a precarious situation between her daughter and her husband. Shortly after midnight, I took my first call. Mom. She was crying and her voice was rough. She said I told him everything without introducing herself. After you left, we had the most honest conversation of our marriage. 35 years of silence, finally broken. Even though I knew the answer, I still inquired, how did he take it? He's angry, hurt, embarrassed. But mostly, I think he's facing his own failures for the first time. She hesitated. He never meant for it to be this way, Claire. When we agreed to raise you as his, he truly believed he could love you as his own. Intentions don't erase 34 years of emotional neglect, Mom. I know, she said in a whisper. I failed you too. I should have insisted on the truth years ago. It was the most candid conversation we had ever had, and we spoke for about an hour. She described how scared and young she had been, pregnant and unsure, and how she had accepted Charles's terms because they seemed to be the only option. How she had attempted to make up for his inability to connect with me with her own love. How she had finally found the fortitude to confront difficult realities because of cancer. As our conversation came to an end, I said, what happens now? I don't know, she began. But whatever comes next will be built on truth, not pretense. That has to be better in the long run. My siblings sent me a barrage of messages the following day. As expected, Ethan's text was defensive. You had the option to deal with this in private. Are you aware of the impact this has on the family's reputation? Lily's tone was more accommodative. I regret not knowing. It tells you a lot about how your father handled you. When the dust settles, can we have a talk? Always the most emotionally astute, Jake merely wrote. You still call me your brother. Damn DNA. I adore you. Their responses were indicative of their character traits and familial roles. As the heir apparent, Ethan had the greatest stake in keeping up the Wilson front. Lily tried to find a middle ground between her sincere love for me and her allegiance to our parents. Jake could most readily offer unconditional acceptance because he was the youngest and least involved in family politics. As James and I were getting ready to head back to Boston 3 days after the party, a surprising name showed up on my phone. Wilson Charles. With my thumb hanging above the screen, I asked James, should I answer? That depends, was his careful response. Are you ready to hear whatever he has to say? I inhaled deeply before answering the phone. Hello, Charles. Claire. His tone had changed, sounding older and more reserved. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. In person. My office. Today at 2. There was a part of me that wanted to say no, to take away the authority he was so used to having. However, another section acknowledged the necessity of this discussion. For me, not for him. Fine, I said. But I'm bringing James. Bring whoever you want, he answered. After a moment, he said, please. As though he had never heard the word before. The top 3 floors of a shiny downtown skyscraper with the family name was held by Wilson Properties. As an adult, I hadn't been there much because I always felt like an outsider in places my siblings were able to traverse with ease. Floor-to-ceiling views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline could be seen from Charles's corner office. As we walked in, he stood, pointing to the chairs instead of behind his massive desk, a small but important change from his typical power dynamics. He started by saying, thank you for coming, another out-of-character recognition. He talked about the business for a few minutes, discussing recent events, market circumstances, and other safe subjects that postponed the inevitable. At last, he let out a deep breath and looked me in the eye. Your mother has explained everything, he replied. Things I've known but never processed appropriately. That's quite an understatement, I said, maintaining a steady tone. I'd like to offer you $5 million, he replied. Stated abruptly. A clean break. Confidentiality agreement included, naturally. James stiffened next to me, but I didn't panic. This transactional strategy was, in a sense, just what I anticipated from Charles Wilson. You still don't understand, I shook my head. This was never about money. I built my own success. I don't need or want your millions. Then what do you want, he inquired, sounding genuinely perplexed. Nothing. Not from you. Not anymore. For years, all I wanted was your love and approval. Now I just want the truth acknowledged, not buried under more secrets and legal documents. Charles, a man whose entire worldview revolved around power struggles and financial transactions, appeared truly bewildered when faced with an emotional reality that was beyond his ability to measure or manage. The truth is, he said, I tried to love you as my own. But every time I looked at you, I saw another man. My pride, it got in the way. By the time I realized what I'd done, the pattern was set. Although that wasn't exactly an apology, it was possibly the most truthful thing Charles Wilson had ever spoken to me. I said, thank you for that much honesty, at least, and got up to signal that the discussion was done. I won't take your money. And I won't sign anything. But I also won't deliberately damage your reputation or the family business. The truth is enough for me. Charles called after me as James and I made our way to the door. What will you do now? I took a quick look back. Live my life. On my terms. And find my real family. The moment I got back to Boston, I started looking for Daniel Calloway's family. Finding his surviving relatives in San Diego, a sister named Susan and 2 children from his marriage, a son named Jake and a daughter named Emma, took less than 2 weeks thanks to his name, approximate location, and the resources my success provided. One of the most anxious times in my life was when I made my first phone call to Susan Calloway. She affirmed he never knew after I told her. But there was always something missing in Daniel's life. He used to say he felt like he'd left something important behind in Chicago. I made plans to meet my half-siblings in person through Susan. Jake and Emma Calloway shared my biology but not my background, in contrast to the Wilson siblings who shared my upbringing but not my DNA. Our first encounter, which took place at a restaurant on the beach in San Diego, was uncomfortable, touching, and ultimately therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. You have his eyes, Emma said, looking at my face from the other side of the table. She was only 2 years older than me at 36. In another world, we might have been sisters. And his terrible sense of humor, Jake grinned as he listened to some of my caustic remarks. Dad would have loved knowing about you. They talked about Daniel's work as an architect, his love of sailing, and his commitment to his kids. In stark contrast to my Wilson experience, they showed me pictures, pointed out similarities, and opened up to me about their life. Jake said, I know for sure that he loved deeply, even though he wasn't perfect. In the months that followed, I renegotiated boundaries with the Wilsons and progressively cultivated relationships with my Calloway family. Weekly phone conversations and frequent visits helped my mother and I become closer. Honesty enhanced rather than harmed our bond. One afternoon, Jake showed up at my office without warning, becoming the first Wilson brother to pay me a visit in Boston. I told Dad I needed space to figure things out. He said that night at dinner. The truth is, I've always admired how you built your own path. Maybe I need to do the same. A month later, Lily followed suit, hesitantly re-establishing our relationship without Charles's influence tainting our exchanges. The only one who kept his distance was Ethan, who was still viewed as Charles's heir apparent and was not prepared to jeopardize that position by establishing separate relationships. As I worked through these intricate family dynamics, therapy remained crucial. Dr. Landon assisted me in navigating the emotional terrain of having 2 distinct family systems, each of which needs a different kind of healing and isn't entirely complete. She said, family isn't always about DNA or legal definitions, during one especially enlightening session. Sometimes it's about who shows up for you, who sees you clearly, who makes space for your authentic self. James grew to be the most significant member of my family by this metric. He proposed 6 months after Charles's birthday celebration, during a weekend getaway to Martha's Vineyard, which was once connected to traumatic Wilson family getaways. He simply murmured, I love you, while displaying a ring that glinted in the sunset. Not because of or despite your family's story, but because of who you've become through it all. Our engagement gave me a vision of a family based on choice rather than duty, which hastened my recovery process. We elected to have a modest wedding and only invited those who had shown real concern for our relationship. My mother, Jake, Lily, the Calloways, and friends who had grown to be like family over the years were on the guest list. The choice to exclude Charles felt less like a punishment and more like a sincere recognition of our situation. Still, he sent a costly present. Old habits don't go away easily. I gave it to a foster care agency that helps kids who don't have steady family ties. My marketing firm started a pro bono campaign for an adoption advocacy group a year after the altercation at Charles's birthday party. The group helps youngsters in difficult family situations and adult adoptees find services and support. The endeavor resulted in a favorable outcome after decades of misunderstanding by meaningfully combining my professional talents and personal experience. Life is still changing. With my mother torn between allegiances and my siblings balancing their own trajectories between family legacy and personal integrity, my relationship with the Wilsons is still complex. My relationships with the Callows deepen, generating new ideas for what may have been while providing hints of what might have been. Regarding Charles, we have very little but friendly contact, mostly through my mother's family gatherings. He never expressed regret verbally, but his actions gradually changed. He became less domineering and more considerate of others' boundaries. It's unclear if this is a sign of true development or just a practical adjustment to the new situation. It's obvious that I no longer base my value on his approval. The young child who yearned for her father's affection has matured into a lady who recognizes that not everyone who created a hole can fill it. Rather, I've discovered how to construct a life full of meaningful relationships and genuine love by building around those areas. If you're viewing this and can relate to my experience of family suffering, know this. Perfect settlement or fairy tale reconciliation are not necessary for healing. Sometimes it only entails accepting reality, letting go of unachievable ideals, and using the fragments that are left to create something new. You can find family produced, selected, frequently with unexpected individuals at unexpected settings. I appreciate you following my journey. If this story struck a chord with you, please like, subscribe, and tell someone who might need to hear that our identity is shaped by how we heal from familial scars rather than by them. What does family mean to you? Please leave a remark below. I read them all and I'd be interested in knowing what you think. And that's the thing about betrayal, it can break you or it can build you. I chose to rise. Because the greatest revenge isn't shouting back or striking hard, it's healing fully, living freely, and refusing to carry someone else's bitterness. If you're carrying pain, set boundaries, protect your peace, and know you don't have to prove your worth to anyone who couldn't see it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you faced betrayal or found strength in the aftermath? Share your story in the comments. Let's grow through this together. What did rising above look like for you?